The world is always changing. People want to know what's next. Here is what will happen over the next decade. I'm Pastor John Warren. Welcome to Church of the Future.
Think about the future.
Hi there folks, welcome aboard to this next episode, Church of the Future. Thank you for joining me. So in this episode, I'm going to be talking about the future of the church in terms of the children and the young people that are being raised within the church. So I'm really going to be talking about parenting, but talking about Christian parenting, and I'm going to talk about how we're going to go in passing on the faith to the next generation of children who grow up in the church. And I'm sure there'll be many young people who come to Christ who don't grow up in Christian families, and I've already addressed that in episode 1, I think. But today I'm going to specifically talk about the children who do grow up in the church, and talk about what the future is going to look like in our attempts to pass on the faith to the next generation, to our children, our grandchildren, and everything like that. So I've made the point already that we are in a deeply individualistic age. We're in an individualistic society, and that makes it hard to pass on anything to the next generation. And, when I was 5 years old, I was told that my father cheered for the Balmain Tigers in Sydney's rugby league competition, which was a sport that he was his favourite, that he followed most keenly. And I guess I could have followed Balmain, but I thought, well, I'll pick my own team. And so I picked a completely different team. Now, a lot of people do end up cheering for the team that their father or their family supported. I know that that's common, but it just is what a sign of the individualistic age, where a 5-year-old decides, no, I'll reject what my family has done and I'll do my own thing. I'll blaze my own path, and I was allowed to do it. Plenty of 5-year-olds might have the thought, but then get told, no, that's not how it works. But I was allowed to do it because I grew up in an individualistic society, and today it's even more so than ever before. We live in an individualistic society. Now, as a Christian parent, I deeply, deeply want my children to walk with God. I want them to commit their lives to Christ and to grow in Christ, and I want that so badly. I would give my left arm if it would guarantee that, if I could guarantee that outcome. But of course, the most terrifying thing about being a Christian parent is the realization that you cannot compel faith. I cannot compel my child to be a devout Christian. And I wish I could, but I can't. Oh, of course, there's stuff I can do. Of course, I can encourage and everything like that. And I'll talk about some of that in this episode. But the fact is, you cannot compel faith in your child. And there is no more shocking realization for a Christian parent to reach when they realize it's up to them whether they believe and commit their life or not. And it doesn't matter how much I huff and puff, I cannot guarantee a particular outcome. And so the fact is, some of our children will walk with God and some will not. And that's I can't imagine anything more challenging, anything more difficult than or anything that would bring me more grief, to be honest, than to have a child of mine not walking with God. So by the grace of God, I don't have that at this point, and pray that I never will. But I grieve for Christian parents whose children are far from God. I grieve the people in that scenario, it must be really tough. Must be really tough. What I am going to say in this episode is that Christian parenting matters tremendously, and what I think the key to Christian parenting is, well, let me explain. Your children generally inherit your morality, but they generally don't inherit your preferences. So you might have a preference for Chinese food, and your children will likely, therefore, get exposed to a lot of Chinese meals as they grow up. But there's no guarantee that they will love Chinese food the way that you do. In fact, there's every chance that in 30, 40 years' time, their favourite takeaway will be the Mexican joint, and Chinese just won't feed it, just not their preference. Now, it might be because obviously they've had that exposure, so I guess they're more likely to have that preference than the average person on the street, but preferences are generally not inherited from parent to child. But morality, I think, generally is inherited. So when I was a child, my mum was super diligent in making sure that please and thank you was said at the correct time, like always. And so I grew up very good with my pleases and my thank yous because that was how I was raised. And it was not just a good idea. It's not just something that you might want to do. It was, this is right, and to fail to do it is wrong. It was a moral issue. And I was told it was just part of the discipline that I was raised in, was being good at saying please and saying thank you and just generally having good manners. And of course, most of the morality that we're raised with, we keep. Not all of it. Obviously, there's some people who are raised to believe that certain things are good and bad, and they end up thinking, oh, actually, I'll make my own decision on that one. And some people end up with a higher level of morality than what they were raised with, and some end up with a lower level of morality than what they're raised with. But generally, I think that preferences are inherited very weakly, if at all, but morality is inherited very strongly. So I think that as I've reflected on watching many, many Christian parents raise their children over the years, and just my own journey doing it, and just the wisdom that God's given me, I think the key thing in Christian parenting is that the children see your submission to the church, not your submission to God, your submission to the church. All right. So if you've got children and you decide to do this and not do that, and you explain to your children, we believe that God is leading us to move from this house to that house, or to leave this church and join that church, or to do this and not do that, or to go into this line of work, or to help this person in this particular way. Like, you can explain to your children, because we're Christians, we believe that God wants us to do this as you go along doing the Christian life. And you know what? Your children see that, and they can't know if it was God or not, can they? Right? You can tell your children, God's. We told our 6-year-old daughter, God is calling us to leave Australia and move to Britain to plant a church. And she had no way of knowing if we had heard from God or not. She just got told that's what the family is doing. She got told that God was in it, but she had no way of knowing if that was right or not. And so I don't think that example, whilst many people were telling us it's a great step of faith, I'm not sure that it really had a profound, obviously moving across the world has a big impact on a child, but in terms of the development of her own faith, I don't know if that was a really big thing, because she had no way of knowing if we were wrong or right. If God really did say to do it or not, she was told that we thought we did, but she had no way of double checking. However, what your children can double check is, are you submitted to the church? Right? So, because the child goes to church, attends the church, the child can see who the church leaders are. The child is involved in church life. The child has friends at church and everything like that. The child grows up in the church so that they understand what the church is doing and what the church, and they hear the preaching and teaching, and so they understand what the church says about how life should be lived and everything like that. And so the child can see if the parent is submitted to the church leadership or not. So if the church leadership gets up and says, we really believe that God's called us to do some missions work in Philippines, then everyone in the church might go, oh, all right, okay, and the leaders might say, and we're organising, we're going to take a team to the Philippines, and we're going to do this ministry, and we want you to all, come. Some of you come with, and if you can't come with, then make a donation towards the costs of doing this ministry and everything like that. Right? If the church undertakes a missions program to the Philippines, your children are quite able to see if you're on board or not, right? And so if a Christian parent around the dinner table says, if there's a conversation that goes along the lines of, oh, we're going to go to the Philippines, and mum or dad says, oh, I have no interest whatsoever in going to the Philippines, it's not for me, right? Then the child goes, In other words, the child sees your church involvement is a preference. It's not an issue of morality. And remember, preferences are rarely inherited, but morality normally is passed down from one generation to the next. And so what I've noticed in church life is that some people are genuinely committed and walk in submission to the church leadership. It's rare. It's more in our individualistic, consumerist society. It's more common that people are mere consumers of a church, and the minute one thing goes wrong, bang, they're out. They'll leave, and the minute they get told to do something they don't want to do, they'll probably leave as well. That's life in a spiritually immature, consumeristic, individualistic society. That's how church goes down, tragically, but that's how it works. And so if the children discern that the parents are not submitted to the church leadership, then they probably will share in that moral position, and they will also not submit to the church leadership, and the chances of them walking with God are small. But the children of those who do submit to the church leadership are far more likely to walk with God than the opposite. That's what I've observed, and that's the conclusions that I've reached. And when I talk to my daughter about the things that have made an influence on her faith journey, it's surprising. It's not what you would think. And she has been impacted by the times that we have done what we were told to do, even when we didn't want to do it. She was watching, she was observing, and she took note. And it had a profound impact. So I believe that that's how it works in Christian homes, that it's generally hard to pass the faith on to your children unless you are obviously submitted to your church leadership. And most Christians, of course, are not. And so that's why we're in for in episode 1, I described it as a revival of churn. If we are going to have a season where the church grows and does well, where the world leaves it alone for a bit after easing off on some of the opposition and persecution that Christians have endured in recent decades, if we are going to have that Acts 9:31 season where the church is left alone to grow, it's going to be a revival of churn because depressingly small number of the children raised in the church will stay in the church. And I just blows my mind the number of adult and young adult children of devout Christians who are not walking with God. Like, I'm not talking about people on the periphery of the church. I'm not talking about spiritually immature. I'm talking about pastors and leaders and just really solid people whose faith is so strong, and yet the percentage of their children who are walking with God in their adult years is depressingly small. Like, it's just, and I just, my heart breaks for the people in that situation who have been faithful to God in their own lives for decades, and their children who they've tirelessly raised and have put into for their whole lives have walked away from the faith entirely. It's just heartbreaking, and it's just so widespread. It's just so widespread, and so that's why if we're having a revival, it's a revival of churn, because the children who are raised in the church, it won't be those children, to a large extent, who are the next generation of Christian leaders. And it's heartbreaking, but that's where we find ourselves. That's the fruit of the individualistic society in which we live. So many kids raised in strong, solid Christian homes just not walking with God at all because they've made their own decision, and their decision is not for Christ. So it's shocking, it's heartbreaking, and of course, thus far, as I'm getting towards the end of the episode, right, I've said nothing about kids ministry and youth ministry, because the fact is that Christian parents have way more influence and impact on their children and their children's faith journey than what any kids leader or any youth leader has. And so once a young person has decided that they're going to take a step towards God, then kids ministry and youth ministry kicks in. And then it's the sort of thing that helps them to grow. I think it can be a tremendous help to Christian young people to have a good youth ministry at their local church, and to have Christians that they can connect with, Christian leaders who are not their parents. That can be a great blessing. There's no doubt about that at all, and that can really speed their growth and everything. But Christian parents are the overwhelming influence, and kids and youth ministry is a long way back in terms of how much influence it has. And really, people decide, the parable of the sower. The minute that I became a pastor, the parable of the sower became my least favourite Bible passage because it talks about the 4 different kinds of seed that fell in different kinds of soil, and the first lot of seed didn't make it and failed instantly, wouldn't respond to the gospel at all. The second kind of seed embraced it for a short time, but the minute that they realised that, it's actually a bit difficult at times to be a Christian, bang, finished, done, gone. The third kind of seed walks the Christian life for quite some time, but eventually the love of money and desire for other things chokes the life of the seed, and they die. But only the fourth kind endures and is fruitful. And the parable of the sower it tells me as a pastor that it doesn't matter what I do, that some people will still walk away from God. And some people will be part of the church for a good while and then walk away from God, which is even more gutting than the first 2 scenarios. So the fact is, folks, the parable of the sower is true. And as a Christian parent, you cannot compel faith. As a Christian parent, you cannot guarantee. There are no guarantees. Even if you do everything right, everything that I've said, showing obvious submission to the church, it still doesn't guarantee. I think it has a profound impact, but there's no guarantee. And the parable of the sower is true. I hate it for being true, but it is true. And you cannot guarantee that any one individual will continue to walk with God. Even people have been walking with God for a long, long time. And so that is where we find ourselves, that Christian parenting is tremendously difficult because in an individualistic society, it's just so hard. But if we make it an issue of morality to submit to the church leadership, then I think that has the most profound impact upon Christian children in Christian homes. And, by the grace of God, I think that's a powerful witness that draws people to walk with God and to continue walking in the faith that they have been raised. But it's not easy, and there are no guarantees, and we're in a difficult place in such a deeply individualistic society that the future of the church is many, many people, young people who've been raised in the church, walking away. That is what will happen. However, they will be replaced by first-generation Christians, by people who were not raised in the faith, who God does something in their lives and draws them into faith, draws them into the church. And so to the extent that the church will grow, and I'm optimistic that the church will grow over the next decade, it will be reliant on first-generation Christians far more than you would think, far more than it should be. The fact is, if you've been raised in a Christian home, you've won the lottery in life. There's millions of people in this world who are far, far away from God because they've been raised in circumstances where the message of Christ hasn't really reached them. And so it's very unlikely that they would commit their lives to Christ. Millions upon billions of people are raised in such circumstances in this world. If you have been raised in a Christian family, you won the lottery. You won the lottery. And yet so many of our lottery winners are going to take their winning ticket and bin it and walk away from God to their destruction, which is just grieves me deeply. And yet from the parable of the sower, we know that this is true. So that's how I see things unfolding over the next decade for Christian parents. And just keep praying for your children. Keep praying and showing them from the way that you live, and who knows what God will do. So bless you, and please put a comment. It'd be great to get some discussion going. Love to hear your feedback, but that's all for now. Cheers then.
the future.